And at the end of 3 hours of talking, she broke. And she started talking about growing up in Scientology and how it had damaged her children. And, they actually caught her and sent her off to Los Angeles to their prison force there, unfortunately. But she said that she had 5 agents. 4 of them were reporting to her. 1 was in training.
All right, we are back with John Atack. It has literally been almost 2 years, so we've got to definitely catch up, fill in any blanks on Scientology. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well indeed. How are you today, Eric?
I'm doing fine, and I was just thinking about it earlier when I was preparing for the interview. You left Scientology in what, 1983?
That's right, yeah.
So, without giving away your age, I'm guessing that most of your life has been outside of Scientology versus inside of Scientology.
Yeah, it'll be 40 years this October since I left. So, yeah, and when you say, and if we go my adult life, I was in Scientology from age 19 to age 29. So I had 9 years in it, and I've had 40 years out. And
Okay, and I'm asking you this because I'm curious. You've been out so long that does it still have any kind of effect on you or PTSD? For example, I've had Doug Kramer on, and he talked about, I think it took him like 10 years of psychotherapy to feel comfortable to even deal with it. I was curious, at what point, I mean, do you feel any effects or no?
no.
Okay.
There are different experiences. Firstly, that I was what's called a public Scientologist, and because I was a writer, artist, musician, I was treated as a celebrity. So I had kid glove treatment at all times, never abused or humiliated. I may be the only person that's true of regarding Scientology. And so I had an easy experience of it. And then when you talk with, say, my dear friend Mike Grinder, he had what a horrific life he had as a consequence of, Ron Hubbard. So the first part is that I came out and I didn't feel particularly scathed. And I didn't understand why nobody else was willing to stand up and talk about them. And then within a few weeks, I did understand. And I hadn't known that there was this kind of intelligence agency that ran harassment. So that was very strange. So the trauma all came afterwards for me, being harassed for 16 years solid. Sued.
What are some examples? Can you describe what was actually done? And
sure, yeah. My house, and this is, I'm confident to say that the Scientologists did this. I don't want to get into any kind of libel situation.
You suspect them?
No, I'm pretty sure there were Scientologists, but Scientologists, as a generality, can't sue me. If I said this was directed by David Miscavige,
gotcha.
But the reality is that Mike Rinder, and many others have now spoken out about this type of harassment. So my house was broken into a couple of times with nothing taken. People would come and hammer on my door at 11 o'clock at night, demanding that I talk to them, and then they were very surprised that I would. People walked up and down outside my house with placards calling me, and when I went to conferences, there'd be people with placards calling me an anti-religious hate campaigner and this kind of thing. It was in 1993, the head of their investigations department came to me. In the last-ditch attempt, she'd had 18 months of running harassment against me and trying to get me to stop and shut up. And she decided she'd come out herself and lied about who she was in our first meeting. And at the end of 3 hours of talking, she broke. And she started talking about growing up in Scientology and how it had damaged her children. And, they actually caught her and sent her off to Los Angeles to their prison force there, unfortunately. But she said that she had 5 agents. 4 of them were reporting to her. 1 was in training. One of those was a guy who was my driver. And so
Oh.
everything I did was being reported to them. They put out sort of all sorts of little pamphlets and booklets, and there was a vicar, an Anglican vicar in Chichester, and he reported that a Scientologist had come and told him that I was a rapist, a former drug addict, a drug dealer, a child molester, and I'd attempted murder. But apart from that, I was a thoroughly nice guy. None of these is true. I later, somebody told me that they were telling people I'd been a heroin addict when I got in Scientology. As far as I know, I've never even been in the same room as any heroin, let alone taken it. So, absurd falsehoods are spread around. Then there was a tour where their private detective, Gene Ingram, who was a disgraced LA cop, and being disgraced in the LAPD can be quite hard. You can do some quite nasty things in there. But he was thrown out. Chief Gates was very public about what a horrible person he was. He traveled all around the world interviewing people I'd known from childhood upwards. And they have this thing they call noisy investigation. And there's a little policy about it, published by Hubbard, written by a woman called Kathy, I can't remember her name, actually, it escapes me at the moment, but not written by him. He'd had somebody else write it and put it out. And what you do is you ring people up and you say, I'm gathering information about such and such's criminal background.
I see.
I've already picked up some really fascinating information. And they ring you.
This sounds like push polling.
Yeah, tell me about that.
Push polling is when people would call and say, I understand that you're voting for, we'll say John McCain, because I know what happened to him. I understand you're voting for John McCain. And people will be like, oh, yes. And then be like, so it doesn't bother you at all, or you're completely supportive of his mixed race children. As an example. So it would be like the political group would call to talk to whomever, or they just say, so how do you feel about such and such? And then they just smear them with a question.
Yeah, exactly.
So
exactly. Well, this is a technology developed by Scientology, and I'm sure they'll sue anybody else for using it, because they used to have the patents on it. So this guy, Gene Ingram, he traveled to Australia to interview a teenage girlfriend of mine. He came from a parent's house, and my dad was terminally ill at the time, and he accosted him on the doorstep, and he had tomato plants in the conservatory, and Ingram had already walked around the house and said, oh, you're growing cannabis. So my 75-year-old dad was like, I don't know what you're talking about. And they gathered up what they got from there. They'd summon me into legal depositions. They'd sue me. I was sued in New York. I was sued here in England.
Did they win?
Yeah, absolutely. Nothing. Well, not in New York. We lost the initial case. I have the rare privilege of being there are only two people who've had their books banned since the founding of the United States, because of the freedom of speech. I'm one of them. The other was Victor Marchetti for his book on the CIA, and the idea was that there might be some security issues there. But a judge actually injuncted my book from publication. This was what is now Let's Sell These People a Piece of Blue Sky, which remains the only history of Scientology, which shows Hubbard's sort of conflicting statements about his own background. And the incredible fabulisms. He wasn't a nuclear physicist. He wasn't a war hero. And he hadn't studied with any gurus in the East. And that's...
No, he studied with Crowley, right? And ran with Jack Parsons.
He ran with Jack Parsons. Crowley actually dismissed him as a con man and never met him. Hubbard would later call him his very good friend, but they didn't meet. And there's a letter from Crowley about him. But yeah, he was a big fan of sex magic. And
didn't he steal Jack Parsons' wife?
very confusing situation. That was in Pasadena, and Hubbard left
Hmm.
the Navy. He'd tell us all he was crippled and blind at the end of World War II, but he might have been blind drunk a few times. But he actually went and practiced this magical ceremony to try and incarnate the whore of Babylon, the scarlet woman of the Book of Revelation. They wanted to incarnate this and bring about the end days. Crowley thought he was the Beast 666, the Antichrist. Hubbard would later, in a secret issue, which was only published after he died, claim that he was the Antichrist. So there's a little bit of a disagreement between him and Crowley. He also said he was Lucifer. He was the enemy of Jehovah and of Christ. That caused a few people to leave, so they withdrew that particular secret teaching. But yeah, Parsons was living with a woman called Sarah Northrup, and Hubbard ran off with her and all of Parsons' money. They put a business
lot
together.
of money.
Yeah, I think it was about
Yeah.
$35,000 in 1946. We're talking, so
Which is, like several $100,000 now, I
yes,
believe, in
$500,000,
equivalent.
I would think. Yeah, and Hubbard, I think he put $200 of his own money in, but they went off to
Oh,
Florida to buy yachts, and I dug out the court proceedings, before the internet and all of this sort of stuff. A great deal of the material about Scientology is on the internet, so it's really easy to research now. That's because I went and found it. And there was this case where Hubbard was ordered to pay Parsons the money back. He never did. And yeah, he'd married this woman, Sarah, without having divorced his first wife. So yeah, this is who we're dealing with here.
he also, okay, couple more things. From what
Sure.
was it, Jack Parsons that he had the bet with who could start a religion?
There's Russell Miller. I worked with Russell Miller, who wrote an incredible biography of Hubbard called Barefaced Messiah, which has got to be the best title of a book ever. I remember the day he thought it up, and he rang me up and said, "I've thought it, just wonderful." He was a Sunday Times journalist who'd written about Getty and Hefner, and would write about Conan. Excellent biography of Conan Doyle. So digging around in this, we between us found 4 people that Hubbard had said the best way to make $1 million is to start a religion. And so, yeah, that's where that comes from. Scientology denies this, saying George Orwell said this. You're going, oh, so of course you can't actually repeat something that somebody else has previously said. That's not really rational.
Well, and it seems like Jack Parsons kind of had his own thing going with the sex magic and the routine. So they're interesting contemporaries. That's why I wanted to
Yeah, and
bring that up.
the ceremony is published. And of course, Jack Parsons was the Jet Propulsion Laboratories. He was the developer
Genius.
of solid rocket fuel. There would be no moon landings if somebody hadn't come up with that. So yeah, he was an incredible chemical genius and lunatic. And they did a ceremony called the Babylon Working. This attempt to bring hell to earth, basically. And the ceremony was basically they listened to, I think it's Rachmaninoff, The Isle of the Dead, and Hubbard intoned, and you've got the whole script, everything was said, while Jack Parsons masturbated. So I was told off for calling this a homosexual ritual, but it seems a little bit gay to me,
Well, and okay, that does lead into some other contradictions that seem to be about, like, from what I understand, Scientology is very much against any kind of pharmaceutical medication, but L Ron Hubbard, by much reporting, was popping piles of pills at the end of his life. Would that be a fair statement?
Yeah, fair statement. I mean, also at the beginning of his life, he was, in 1950, when he launched his subject, originally called Dianetics, until he sold the name and had to find a new one. He talks about using amphetamines. He's very enthusiastic about it. There are a number of lectures in the book, Dianetics, The Mental Science of Modern Health, forgive me. He says, take amphetamines. he, in a lecture I found, they tape recorded, there are transcripts of them. In a lecture I found, he talked about making himself a guinea pig on an experiment to come off phenobarbital, barbiturate drug. And he says how difficult it was to come off it. Well, it was very difficult because 13 years after he gave that lecture, he tried to get some called Nembutol in this country. He signed a prescription, Dr. L Ron Hubbard, and tried to get barbiturates. So we know those things without doubt because it's from his own mouth. So uppers and downers, but he spoke quite knowledgeably about drugs in Dianetics, the modern science of mental health. There you go. I'll say it how it's meant to be said. And he says that alcohol is the most dangerous and cannabis is, which he calls marijuana, is the least dangerous, which was an interesting perspective for 1950. I think generally, medical science would agree with that now. And in fact, the Professor Nutt's survey of drugs in 2010 absolutely agreed with that alcohol was the most dangerous. So he was interested in drugs. I had a communique from a guy who said his guru had taken LSD with Hubbard, and David Mayo, who is meant to have saved Hubbard's life through counselling in 1977. He told me that Hubbard had told him in conversation that he had taken LSD, which was kind of ironic because you're banned from joining the Central C organization if you've taken LSD. Jerry Armstrong, who created the immense Hubbard archive, said that he had seen material where Hubbard was talking about taking Demerol, which is an opiate drug. So, and his son, who twice signed documents admitting to perjury, but I think the pressure on him was such that we should at least listen to what he said. He talked about his father taking huge amounts of drugs during the 7 years during the 1950s when he worked with him, and amphetamines being principal to that.
Okay, now back to your story. You, as you said, you were a public Scientologist, so you weren't a member of the Sea Org or any of that. How did you manage to become literally almost public enemy number one to them? Is it because you were starting a competitive religion or spinoff, or was it because you were just publishing material on them? Well, what gave you such an honor?
Well, initially, I left Scientology because I thought Hubbard was gone and that a bunch of yahoos had taken over. And he wasn't gone, and he was running it. He was suffering dementia.
He was the Yahoo?
He was the super Yahoo, yeah. He was,
okay.
He was suffering from dementia. This is back in '83, issuing crazy orders. And I'm many of us, about half of, there were maybe 50,000 Scientologists at that point. I don't think there have ever been more than that, despite their claims of millions. And about half of us left, partly because members of his Guardian's office staff were sent to prison for, their kidnapping, false imprisonment, bugging, burglary, theft of government documents, forgery of government credentials. 11 of them went to prison, including his wife, Mary Sue. That happened in the US. There was a parallel action in Canada where there were convictions. So a lot of people left because of that, because they found they'd been part of a scurrilous intelligence agency. And some people, like me, left. And I wanted to be out of the mother cult for that reason. But I really believed in Scientology. I had 9 years of thinking it really was salvation for humanity. And so I left for that reason, and accidentally found myself at the middle of what would come to be known as the independent movement, the free zone, some people call it. And I, within about 3 months, was just completely disillusioned. And I'd made such a connection with people that were giving, Scientology for much lower prices and much more efficiently than the mother cult, that I ended up defending them. So, when a little group of them went and stole the upper level materials, the secret materials. They just walked into the Copenhagen organization wearing these sailor suits and all got up, said they were a mission from on high, and were given all of this material. Nobody checked who they were, and they walked away with it. And I spent 10 years working on the case defending those people, who in the end didn't pay me. But
Oh,
that's another.
great. Did you make it to the highest levels, or
Yeah,
where were you?
yeah. I made it to. There are now 28 levels. Another one was released after I left, and I'd done 25. So there were, and in fact, the 26th level was training for the 27th, and they were a continuation
Mhm.
of the 25th. So I'm familiar with all of their material.
When the material was stolen and you saw the a material above your level, did it startle you or surprise you in any way?
It was actually at my level. I'd done what they call OT5,
Oh, okay.
and so what was very interesting was seeing that they were given two forms of the pack, and we'd been told that this guy David Mayo, who had actually largely researched this level, if that's the right word, that the reason it hadn't worked and the reason so many of us were leaving was because of material he'd put in that had now been changed. And I had the privilege, and I think very few people have had this, of seeing both packs. And there were 6 of, I think there were 54 issues in it. There were 6 that had David Mayo's name on them in the original pack. And the difference was that his name had been taken off and L Ron Hubbard had been put there. That was the only difference. So the thing that had made us leave was that L Ron Hubbard hadn't signed those particular things. Of course, when you are doing those levels, you're not shown the material. So I'd not read the material before. It's only the people who are giving it, the so-called auditors, who see it. But yeah, so I just came to understand it was very straightforward. There was a journalist called Michael Lynn Shannon who'd done incredible research into Hubbard. And somebody came back from this Boston lawyer's office who had the unfortunate name Michael Flynn, which we think was somebody else now. And he brought me this stack of documents and said, I'm not going to read these. Here, you have them. And there were his college records, all sorts of reports from through his life. And it was evident that Hubbard was a liar. And as he said, honesty is sanity, and the road to truth must be trod with true steps. And the moment I realized he was a liar, I knew that I couldn't believe what he'd said. What amazed me was when I pointed out these lies to other believers, it did nothing to them. They, I didn't know then about cognitive dissonance and the fact that we were prone, when we're given evidence, to actually push back and just believe what we're told. So within 6 months, I didn't believe in Scientology at all, and I'd become fascinated by this intricate history. And I wrote a book called The Scientology War, which was about this incredible eccentric character, Captain Bill Robertson, who'd appointed me the top man in the United Kingdom, and he'd been Hubbard's assistant, and he was crazy. He was absolutely something else. So I wrote a book about him, and then realized nobody could understand that if they didn't understand the context of Scientology. So I expanded the book. And then I went, well, people are going to think we're just idiots. So then I put in 4 chapters about my own involvement to show I have a friend who's an expert on terrorism. And when I first met her years ago, was first in touch with her, she said that she really liked my book. And I'm going, what is somebody who's working as a psychologist in Iraq in the detention centers doing, reading my book? Why would she do that? And then she said, I find it very useful in showing people, what can happen. Now she's dealing with radicalization. A couple of years later, I published the unexpurgated version of Let's Sell These People a Piece of Blue Sky. And I said, would she write a puff for it? And I got the explanation, which was to say that is to show people that even somebody who seems relatively intelligent, such as myself, can become mired in a stupid set of beliefs, crazy set of beliefs.
Well, I've interviewed Rick Allen Ross and Ian Haworth both, and I know Rick Allen specifically told me that he's dealt with deprogramming like 4 doctors, a couple of them are surgeons, with different cults, not only Scientology, but any kind of oppressive group, or I forget what the term of the day is. I know you went over that a little bit in your book.
Authoritarian cults is good.
Okay, yeah, in terms of what name is good or bad, because there's always those questions on what is a cult, isn't a cult, what is cultish, what is a cult of personality, what, because there are some things I think you would agree with, like people who are deadheads.
Oh,
They go around, they follow the band, they tour.
and the band are all dead now, but they're still following them. It's like,
Sure, but
Jerry
that's not the
Garcia
band.
will resurrect, I tell you.
The band themselves, from everything I've seen, isn't manipulating them
No.
or anything other than selling merch.
They seem like
they'll sell merchandise.
They seem like really nice people, the Grateful Dead. They,
Right. And Jimmy Buffett has his following, and others have their followings too. So we as a species, I think, tend to get tribal, and we like to find our way into a particular tribe or identity, be it a lot of people. I was running for a while with marathons, and people self-identify. I'm a runner.
Yeah.
Not that they run, but they are a runner. And I think that that's a tendency. Is that something you found working with people to help them? Because you mentioned you help people deal with leaving it. Is it to separate their identity from Scientology? Like, you are not a Scientologist, you just happen to do Scientology, or anything like that?
Yeah, absolutely right. And what tends to happen is that we have many sort of identities within us, and I do in my book, Opening Our Minds, I've got a little graph with an XY axis. And one of the axes is how you feel at the time, your mood at the time, in your behavior, your identity. If you're angry, or if you're scared, or if you're happy, will be different. But the other axis is who you're talking with. And so if you're talking to your pet rabbit, or your children, or your boss, or you will talk in a different way. Even your tone of voice, the words you use will be different. Now, to me, those are all identities, and that's absolutely fine. They're not dissociated from one another. You're aware the next day that you shouldn't have shouted at somebody or what have you. So it's not part of this so-called dissociative identity disorder, which I have a certain skepticism about. But what tends to happen is that to belong to a tribe, we adopt the language, the manners, the costume of that tribe, and so we become identified and see our identity in that way. So, as my friend Yuval Laor puts it, the leader of the cult is the parent. I think we've all seen that one, fairly simple. Our fellow cult members are our siblings. That one's fairly obvious. The cult itself, the doctrine, the teaching, becomes our baby. Becomes, so you tell somebody that their baby looks like Winston Churchill, and you see what they say. And we're cult members, and it doesn't matter. The cult could be the Grateful Dead. It could be a soccer team. It can be, the Latter-day Saints. That is a part of my identity. If you assault that, you assault me. And so helping somebody to reconnect with who they were before and then move forward. I've often found, I've dealt with about 600 people in recovery. I don't really do it anymore. It's been a while. But, one-on-one, about 600 people. And watching people, what seems to happen is they're about 12 years old when they leave whatever the group is, Rajneeshis, Krishnas, Munis, whatever you like, because they've gone into the pre-adolescent state, that last state of, with kids where they worship their dad or what have you before they realize what terrible people we really are. And then they will very often leave and go into adolescence. And so many of my friends grew beards and smoked dope, and walked around in sandals. They went back to what they'd been doing before. I can't stand sandals personally. But that you then have this difficult problem that it's very easy to inject your own ideas into that
Hmm.
person. There's this simple model, which I think comes from Kurt Lewin, as some people call him, which is unfreezing, changing, refreezing. That this is how groups take people over. And it's a natural process. So when you come away from something, you unfreeze. And it's a matter of what the change will be. And people will often turn to me and ask me what I believe so that they can now join the cult of John. And the answer to that is, look at the awful mess my life is. I don't have any money in the bank. You don't want to follow my beliefs. They're find your own. And getting people, it's commonly said that when somebody leaves an authoritarian cult, you go to the restaurant with them, they get the menu, and then they ask you what they ought to eat because they're so used to being directed. I mean, my membership of Scientology was never to that level, but I have seen that. And so getting somebody, and I think this then segues into the problem with our society, which is that we're not having people develop a self, become, themselves. They're kind of looking to see what everybody else thinks and keeping up with the Joneses or what have you, but their identity is given to them by others. What we might call narcissism. I think it's a bad word, and I think many people have commented on this. Schopenhauer, the philosopher in the 19th century, said about 60% of people don't become people. Erich Fromm reiterated that in his Escape from Freedom in 1941. He said the Nazis came around because about 60% of people have a pseudo self. When Stanley Milgram did his experiments in the early 60s at Yale, 62.5% of people were willing to press the extremely dangerous voltage button on somebody. More recently, Jane McGregor at Nottingham University has, and it's always this number, it fascinates me, 60% of people are...
It's like a Pareto principle, but a little bit off. Instead of 80-20, it's 60-40.
Yeah.
But yeah. But then that's politics too, by the way. If you look at the spread, it is literally 60-40. Everybody's fighting over the 40 because 30% are, quote, right wing or whatever you want, 30% are left wing, whatever you want. They're never deviating.
Yeah.
They're irrelevant to a lot of people because they're going to vote right down the line. You just give them, you say, boom, check this party or check that party. No question. They don't even think about it. Then you start tapering down in there. And that's why 1 to 2%, because you're kind of fighting for the buffers there, the 20 and the 20, and then 1 or 2 it determines everything.
Yeah. And I mean, I've heard the percentage given as about 4% that political campaigners, and you evidently know more about it than I do, but certainly in advertising, if we look at the Coke wars, that I've been absolutely, to understand these problems, I have delved into every kind of manipulation imaginable. Gangsters, how gangs form, radicalization. I spent 10 years looking at terrorism before 9/11, and then years desperately trying to get somebody to hire me to de-radicalize, because we learned how to do that in my field. And I was offered a job by Prevent, the UK counter-terrorist arm, but they work as part of the security services. And I said I'd train people to talk about it and I'd give them something, but going out and talking to some 15-year-old who's been scammed into Daesh or Al-Qaeda was not my idea of a good life. The pay was better than I normally get, but the same mechanisms are functioning in pedophile grooming. Anywhere where we see this control of others, this authoritarianism, somebody becomes the leader, somebody becomes the bully in chief, and the others become the followers. And if we then look at advertising, Coke and Pepsi, brand loyalty. One of the texts I read was some tests that were done on loyalists, and this guy said, I look at the Pepsi can, it's got the red, white, and blue of my country on it. It's a soft drink and it's bad for you. Let's just be honest about this. It has no virtue whatsoever, whether it's diet or zero or what have you. It's not good for you. You can melt teeth in it. But people become fervent about it, and that fervor is of itself a really interesting aspect of human behavior, because they have made a commitment, they've made a cult commitment of faith and belief in somebody, because they have a feeling of certainty. It's a feeling. They're not actually, they don't have evidence, they can't prove it. And years ago, I was about 17, a Bible basher set about converting me, and I talked with him 2 hours because I'm a gregarious sort of person. And he backed away from me in the end, making sure I didn't leap on his back. I hadn't been nasty. I was just questioning certain ideas he was putting forward and quoting scripture at him, which he wasn't very happy about. But he said, I don't understand the Bible, but I know it's all true. And that is the feeling of certainty. I don't understand it, but I know it's true. We all live that way to some extent. We all know that our team is the best team. We all know that the music we listen to is the best music. The food we eat is well, not necessarily, but the things we like are the most likable things.
Yeah, we're all guilty of it.
People become overcommitted. And I think for us to go forward as a society, we need to get into our rather authoritarian education system and start teaching kids intelligent disobedience, courageous followership, things that my friend Ira Chalef has brought into the world.
I don't think that's very likely.
It's happening.
Especially.
It is happening.
Well,
how?
Okay, well, maybe on your side of the pond.
No,
here and there, but
yeah, Sir Ken Robinson has written 2 books where he's actually studying American schools and talking about the many schools that have broken with the model and have found a new way of doing it. Of course, you're dealing with tens of thousands of schools in the US, so the fact that a few hundred have changed. But that change is possible, and a lot of it, I think, is because teachers are not properly valued, because education's been portioned off into little bits rather than going, it's one thing, history, geography, language, science, they're one thing, they're natural philosophy, and by fragmenting them and making them boring, that's the thing I really object to. I'm a high school dropout. That Kanye West.
Well, they're writing books by committee.
Yeah, and we're getting all sorts of box ticking sort of ways to run a society.
Revisionist history.
Yeah.
As well. I mean,
absolutely. And how? Yeah, and things we're not meant to say. That To Kill a Mockingbird was banned in some US school districts because it uses the N-word. And you're going, if you want to find out about racism, that's a wonderful book.
Huckleberry Finn.
So.
Yep. Or they rewrite it to erase the use of a word.
Or the Walt Disney version. Yeah.
Well, Dr. Seuss is being, half of his books are being banned or stopped publishing. So it is a giant mess. But to go on to wrap things up, I'm going to ask the most open-ended, terrible question to wrap things up. But if you have somebody in your family who you feel may be subjected to a coercive cult, or a friend, because of cognitive dissonance and things like that, how would you recommend approaching them? What would be a good first step to, not push them away, but to hopefully bring them in and maybe help them see more of what's going on?
I think you maintain the best possible relationship with a person. And most people leap to this thing where they get some newspaper cuttings or maybe read one of my books about Scientology or something, and start trying to show evidence, start trying to prove something, and understanding that critical thinking is a vital thing for us to learn, but it isn't persuasive. So it doesn't matter how many logical fallacies you understand or try to teach people. We are emotional. There was a neuroscientist who Jill Bolt Taylor, and she said words to the effect of, we think we are thinking creatures that feel. We are actually feeling creatures that think. Also, it's fair to say there is no differentiation between feeling and thought. It's an abstract and erroneous, because we feel.
We decide then justify.
Yeah, exactly. So we first of all feel, and then, as you say, and so teaching people to be friendly and keep away from any upset. There are some videos on my channel about this, and I think my book Opening Our Minds should show something of what's going on. You can also gently parallel, which is you can talk about other groups, never about the group itself, and you can talk about the methods and machinations. We have an ancient Canadian video called Captive Minds, Hypnosis and Beyond, which is on my channel. It's 40 years old, and it is not, the size of the lapels, and the hair. But they do go through the fundamentals, and I would show that to people who are hardcore Scientologists. And because it doesn't mention Scientology, they don't feel threatened. So, and then understanding that they need to talk about it, get them to talk about it. So I used to have this little set of questions, which is, what did you expect from the group when you first joined it? And have you seen people who've achieved this within the group? And let them talk about it. Don't fight with them. Don't contradict them. How much of this have you achieved? When do you expect to achieve it? And be interested in what they have to say about their experience, because it will be interesting if you can just bite your tongue and listen. And that's the important thing. It's much more about listening. What often happens is that somebody becomes alienated by their own family because they're met with aggression. And 20 years later, or however long, they've got nowhere to go. They've lost all connection. So always being welcoming. The other part, probably the last thing to add, is remind them of the good times before. As Steve Hassan, in his excellent Combating Cult Mind Control, talks about having people, show them photographs of the family together, remind them of, funny things that happened in the family, include them in the family, don't push them to the edge. I had a situation, one of my brothers, we had a big family dinner in a pub here, and so there were, 20 of us at the table or something. And my wife and I, who were still in Scientology, were at the far end of the table. And down each side of the table, these clippings attacking Scientology were passed. So we were the last people to receive them. That didn't persuade me that I ought to leave. So humiliating people, being aggressive towards them, it's a very bad idea. And eventually, and also there's this idea of the brainwashed zombie, the idea that if you're in a cult, then you're a brainwashed zombie. This is almost never true. There may have been some rare examples of it, looking at the Manson family and the scary documentary, The Lost Tapes, where you see interviews with 5 of the girls.
There was a lot of drugs involved with that too, though.
Yeah.
A lot of drugs, which, it's taken in, what is it? Well, they were on a type of meth, I believe, in addition to possibly acid, but they were hopped up pretty extreme, and a drug psychosis could well have been involved as well.
Jimson weed was possibly involved as well, but yes, it privately and eventually publicly, Charles Manson explained that from the age of 12 till 20 years later, when he'd spent more time in prison than out, and that he was a very submissive person. He was a small guy. He was beaten up a lot. And then, as he says in Without Conscience, his autobiography, he had 150 hours of Scientology counseling. And that gave him the ability to control other people. So these people were not out of their heads on drugs all the time. But they were in a situation where they had this man who invented a charisma, and then teenage girls. That's the reality of it. In the Lost Tapes, there are interviews with these girls as women. A week after he was arrested, a documentary maker went to Spahn's movie ranch, and it is the most scary thing. They've cut their hair, they've got their rifles, they're ready for helter-skelter, the race war, and they're out of it. And years later, somebody finds these tapes that have been put aside, finds the women, and they tell their stories now, and about the horrible abuse they were subjected to that made them, through trauma bonding, into victims of this group. But generally, the cult member is somebody who wants to do good, wants to help people, wants to make the world a better place.
Well, they believe in a cause. The cult can be the cause,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
So it transfers over. Be an environmentalist. You're talking about different people. Ted Kaczynski wrote the basic template in ecoterrorism. He's the guy who invented the spikes in the trees. He's the guy. No, I mean, these are things that people do now. And it was the Unabomber who wrote these treaties on how to do a lot of the stuff.
Who had been through the CIA mind control program.
AMK Ultra, which, by the way, Charles Manson has been tied to with Dr. Jolly West, who you quote in your book.
In what way with Jolly?
Jolly was working in San Francisco at the time, and with another doctor, I forgot who it was, but Charles Manson was a regular in and out of there, getting acid along with Susan Atkins. Read the book Chaos by Tom O'Neill. I've had him on.
Yeah, I'm interested in that.
Eye-opening.
I knew Jolly, and I've heard all sorts of stories. Sorry, what's the author's name?
Tom O'Neill. The book is called Chaos, and I've interviewed Tom O'Neill on my channel if you just wanted to watch an interview where we go over and talk about quite a bit of it. But
yeah,
that is very interesting.
Yeah, I knew Jolly. We met probably about 4 times, but we spent 5 or 6 hours together each time. And when I first met him, his assistant said he keeps 2 books on his desk. This was when he was head of biobehavior and neuropsychiatry at UCLA Med School. He keeps 2 books on his desk: the Bible and A Piece of Blue Sky. He was a serious opponent of. I talked with Alan Shefflin, who of course co-wrote The Mind Manipulators, one of the first books about MK Ultra, and he was absolutely, and he's a good friend of mine, but he's determined that Jolly was involved in some way with CIA programs and this, that, and the other. And I said,
there's a lot there. I mean, he reported to Gottlieb. There's letters between him and Gottlieb. Gottlieb was the poisoner in chief of the CIA.
Yeah.
He got the funding through the school. Anyway,
I'm going to
there.
Sort of say that yes, Jolly worked for the U.S. Air Force. Yes, he was their go-to guy on anything psychic. One of the things I was told was, he was involved in what happened at Waco. Yeah. And
I don't know if that, I wouldn't say that. Well, I haven't seen that.
Exactly.
Okay.
Well, I had lunch with him in LA while Waco was going on. And it is true. He was ringing up the FBI and the ATF and desperately telling them that they were doing the wrong thing. So who knows? With Alan, who'd been through so many documents that were to do with MK Naomi, MK Ultra, what have you, the only thing he saw was that Jolly's name was on a list. But I'll look further into that. It's interesting.
What is his name again? Alan whom?
Shefflin. He was a professor. He's an emeritus professor of law and a counselor. But he and Upton and Shefflin wrote The Mind Manipulators. That and Boat.
I would love to talk to him sometime.
In '78, they were the first 2 books exposing. Well, Alan's not really chatting anymore. He's not very well. But
sorry to hear that.
Very good man. But so it's such a difficult area, isn't it? Because understanding how deeply somebody was involved and what they did. So I'm fascinated by that, and I'll look at it. Thank you.
Yeah, well, and I did an episode on him with my show partner, with a lot of the history, and some people have reached out to, like, there were some interesting ties with him.
Yeah,
very interesting.
Absolutely.
So, and he could have changed because he did. Oddly enough, Sidney Gottlieb was like the biggest hippie on the planet.
Yeah,
I'm not kidding.
yeah.
Like he lived in a house that was all nature with no electricity, what have you. His goal was to, he had like goats and farm. He literally was of that
Mhm.
mindset. Meanwhile, he's the guy who came up with every means to try to poison and kill Castro.
Yeah.
So there's some really weird contradictions with these people. The MK Ultra, Operation Paperclip. These are all factual things that did happen.
Yeah,
They're not
absolutely. Yeah, paperclip
conspiracy.
is the idea that the Belarusian SS were being imported into the US so that they could run sabotage missions into the USSR. Not enough has been said about that, because again,
Mhm.
the cult view polarizes us. So to be able to look at the dirty tricks played by the US on the USSR, no, we're
Mhm.
all kind of anti-Russia, and at the moment that's very easy to be with the awful things that Putin is doing. But um, in our world, in the counter cult world,
Mm.
a friend of mine has been thrown out of one of the European counter cult groups because he's Russian. And so the identification becomes so extreme that it's like you,
Ban them from the Olympics and on and on. And
yeah,
the banning because of the doping's fine,
absolutely,
but banning an athlete just because they belong to the wrong country, it's like there's a lot of suppressed people in the Middle East, etc. Are you going to ban them? Are you going to, sorry, you're a North Korean, you cannot compete, you cannot be exposed to other people in the world? That doesn't seem right, in my opinion,
I agree.
to
The
ban
way
people.
that Paul Simon was attacked for Graceland because he'd violated the musicians' union rule and he'd worked with South African musicians. I'm pretty sure that the South African musicians who gained an international reputation and became wealthy as a
Hmm.
consequence of making that remarkable piece of music, and it had something to do with bringing apartheid down by showing, this is a ridiculous division that's happening here. So, yeah, and nationalism, the idea that you belong to that country rather than, as Charlie Chaplin and others have said, that they were patriots for the whole world
Mm.
and for the human race. Division.
All right. Well, I have one more question,
Yep.
and yeah, you might have been asked this one before, but what is the one question I should have asked you, but I neglected to?
I don't think you did. What I know about is authoritarianism, uh, how it works, um, how to undo it, probably, because I've dedicated my whole adult life, getting into Scientology was an attempt to try and understand this. And so we could have gone there a little more, but I think you've done a pretty good job, actually, all in all.
Well, fantastic. Um, Definitely, we'll try not to wait 2 years.
No, let's not.
I may have to have you back just to have a chat about Jolly West sometime.
Let's do that. Yeah.
Perhaps discuss his legacy and what you may or may not have known, things like that. That would be a fascinating topic.
Yeah, I mean,
But
he's somebody. He was incredibly supportive of my work. He was one of, one of the most educated and intelligent people I've ever met. You know, the
mhm.
last time I saw him, he was over in London because he'd been asked to do a Festschrift on the author of Cornwell, the author of Master and Commander, writing about medicine during the Napoleonic Wars. And Jolly had been asked to talk because he was an expert on the surgical instruments and this sort of thing. He was a polymath. He was and he most certainly did not present in any way as a sociopath. He was compassionate, considerate.
Mhm.
You know, but he, be very interesting to see. I met him at the very end of his life. It'd be very
Sure.
interesting to see if he was involved in other things. He was the
Yep.
person who first identified demotivation as an aspect of chronic heavy use of cannabis,
Mm,
demotivation syndrome. So
awesome. Well, I definitely will look forward to that. And thank you very much, sir.
thank you too.